Today we will talk about the best beat-em-ups on the Amiga. This will be only horizontal scrolling beat-em-ups, no versus fighting games and no mixed genre platforming games here either. But before we do, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. It helps more than you know. Anyway, I've somehow managed to fish out 10 semi-decent to good games out of the surprisingly huge and deep shit sea of horizontal scrolling beat-em-ups on the system. Some of them were extremely disappointing ports from arcades, others were equally as bad original titles, and just a few lonely little gems were worth a time of my day. And ladies and gentlemen, in one way or another, the top 10 here are also hopefully worth your time. So let's get into it. I don't think that Skull and Crossbones is a great game. Honestly, at best, it's a pretty weak arcade port. But the list needed 10 titles and the ones that did not make it were much worse. Even though the sprites are pretty large and detailed, and its static screens could pass as being quite nice, they move at such jerky way that it's painful to watch, not to mention lackluster hit detection. And quite unfortunately, these two issues will be a reoccurring theme in this video. But since it's a number 10, things can only get better from here on, right? Double Dragon 3 is a very good looking game. In fact, in my opinion, it's the third best looking title on this whole list. I wonder if you know what my second and first are. Anyway, sound-wise it shines as well, and all the attacks and grunts are clear and of very high quality. Pity, however, that there is no in-game music whatsoever. In general, I'd say that it's a good example of how not to botch a port of a game from arcades. In fact, believe it or not, but Amiga's scrolling is actually superior to that of the original. Other than that, it's quite average in terms of both story and gameplay, but that I suppose is down to source material and not this port in particular. A solid 9th spot. From the very get-go, it's quite obvious that Amiga's Shinobi is a very lazy and incompetent port of Atari ST's already not great port of Arcade Original. This god-awful practice, however, was sadly quite common back in the late 80s, and Amiga suffered from a whole line of shitty games that, given its specific chipsets, should have been more colorful, smoother scrolling and fluidly moving, but weren't. And Shinobi is just that. An example of what happens when no care is taken and cash needs to be made fast. All the shits that I've given it aside, it is not for no reason that it's on this list. Despite all the faults and shortcomings, it's actually a pretty fun game to play. It's just sad that it's not as good as it could have been. Even though Dynamite Dux was released in the same year as Shinobi, it's leagues ahead of that title in terms of practically everything, from graphics through sound, music to gameplay. Sprites are big and colorful, and there are a lot of them on the screen at times. There's also a whole plethora of weird and quirky weapons to choose from, spread all through the levels, and all of it combined just works, be it in an odd, part cute, part crazy way. It's clearly a title directed at the bit younger audience, so there's no real graphic violence or gore anywhere, but all the usual arcade beat-em-up tropes are definitely there. It's a bit disappointing though that you can only choose either sound effects or music and not both. But that's 80s on Amiga for you, I suppose. Motorhead is a very easy to pick up and just play title. It's probably the only as unique graphics and idea-wise title as Dynamite Dux on this entire list. You play as Lemmy, a de facto leader of Motorhead, a heavy metal band of yesteryear, and you squash and bash and trash all the non-mockers into non-existence. Whomever did the graphics for it deserves a lot of praise, as use of color on both sprites and background make it look as if it was using a considerably wider palette. On top of that, the music is bar none the rockiest out of all the tunes in this video, even if not performed by the band in real life. All in all, it's the first spot in this top 10 that I actually like everything about, even if it's on a bit more limited, Double Dragon-like side of beat-em-ups. Franko is a very obscure Polish beat-em-up, known most likely only in the country and among these who were actively looking for fighting and beat-em-up games on the Amiga. Funny fact, the title's in English but everything else in game is entirely in Polish, from any written text through omnipresent wall graffitis to sampled vocals. Not that it matters or makes any difference in gameplay, but it's worth mentioning. The game itself takes place in Stettin, a capital of northmost western province of Poland, in the early 90s. You're leading one of two buff, clearly steroid-fueled dudes that kick ass, break legs and punch noses in, quite literally I must add, of virtually anyone who stands in their way. The graphics are not something you'll be writing home about, but the overwhelming brutality and gore fest that fills the screen at an alarming rate is something that was definitely not common back in the day, apart from maybe Mortal Kombat series of games and Moonstone. On one hand, it's a lazy and seriously lacking QA supervision port of Arcade Original. But on another, it's a fucking final fight on the Amiga. I mean, how cool is that? And look at those huge arcade-like sprites. Don't look at the jerky movement and the missing frames of animation though, but look at those sprites, man. Come on, they're great, right? Right? Wrong. I have a very basic love-hate relationship with Final Fight on the Amiga. I must have beaten it a dozen times when it was released, despite all the earlier mentioned flaws, and one of the worst sprite collision detections I've ever seen. And I enjoyed all of it. But if I'm to be honest with myself, looking at it from a sideline, it kind of feels and has that very distinctive smell of a very heavily polished dirt. And color palette used in the game fits that analogy quite well, I might add. Double Dragon 2 is the ultimate game version on the Amiga. Better than both, the one that came before and the one that was released after. It's as faithful to the arcade original as it's possible on the system, and everything that you expect to find in it is here. Enemies, weapons and stages. And all are colorful, detailed, smoothly animated and generally fun to kick and punch. DD2 is a rare example of a game that does everything well, exactly the way it's supposed to be, but nothing exceptional. Meaning that it's overall a good game package that you will always enjoy playing, but will never plan an evening around. Whether it's a lot or not much is a very subjective matter, but for me it's a solid third spot on this list. Golden Axe is most likely the best arcade beat-em-up conversion on the Amiga. Heck, it's actually probably one of the best Amiga games altogether on the system in the 1990s. Some cuts obviously had to be made to the arcade original, and henceforth sprites and backgrounds lost a bit of color and animation frames, but other than that, everything is nigh perfect. All playable characters have been converted, same can be said about all special moves, stages and enemies. And two-player co-op is as good as it was at cigarette smoke-filled arcades of the yesteryear. All in all, it's one of the best conversions of the game to any home system, and any real Amiga fan should do himself or herself a favor and try it out. Doman is probably a controversial choice. Many of you may not agree with me, especially that it's a Polish game and in Polish only. That said, there's never anything interesting to read, anywhere, and the voiceover is barely more than some grunts, screams and shouts, which frankly in a game like that is quite okay. After all, no one's playing a beat-em-up to appreciate the deep and engaging story. Graphics have a very specific look to them, similar to earlier spot on this list, Franko, and since it's by same developer, it shouldn't really be a surprise. Where this testosterone-filled barbarian-like beat-em-up shines like a dog's balls in moonlight though, is gameplay, gore, and two-player co-op. Both medieval beefcakes that players can lead have a variety of different attacks that also change with weapons that they wield, and weapons themselves can be exchanged at various specific points during gameplay. In the end, it's an amazing title that no one expected to be good, and it seemed to surprise with the quality it offers. Only downside I really could think of are the constant pauses between screens for Amiga to load new areas and enemies. Definitely the best game on this list. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. And if you're in a generous mood, you may want to consider a small donation. It would help me make more better content, upgrade my aging editing rig, and perhaps even get a camera. Details are in the description below. Other than that, this is all for me, so have a good one, and I'll see you next time.